From the California State Senate, this is Senate Spotlight.
Hello there, everyone, and welcome here to Senate Spotlight, where we discuss legislative priorities and policy and other related issues with members of the California State Senate. From the state capitol here in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green, and joining us back once again is our honorable senator from the 30th Senate District in Los Angeles, Holly Mitchell, also the chair of the Budget Subcommittee on Health and Human Services. Welcome back.
It's great to be with you as always. Thank you.
Glad to have you. And I know it's been an extraordinary roller coaster, if you will, ride between the spring and this early summer, has it not, here in California?
Literally and figuratively.
And I want to talk, let's just get right into it because we have so little time anyway and so much to discuss, particularly from your purview as a budget sub-chair. The ink is still drying on the governor's budget that he just signed this last week or so ago, $160 billion plus. A lot of money for education, a lot of money for health and human services, but not necessarily enough. There was an initial budget that came out with the Democratic caucus legislative leaders that was pretty distinct and defined in some increased funding on a lot of legislative priorities. And then there was sort of a take-two agreement with the governor, and it was not so much. And I know that that affected you as a legislator, as a policymaker, as a person. Tell us what was in that budget and what is not in it that affects you.
Well, I talked a little bit about it on the floor that Friday when we took the second vote on the second budget bill. And, you know, for me, it was one thing when we all had to kind of lock arms and collectively close our noses and jump during those tough years when the state was in effect broke. And we were forced to make really draconian cuts to critical health and social service programs that really have a life or death difference for many Californians. So this time we didn't get as much for early care and education as we had hoped. The Department of Developmental Disabilities didn't get the reimbursement rate increases. Those community-based providers haven't seen increases since 2008. We did not get an increase in the SSI, SSP reimbursement for aged, blind, disabled seniors, some of our most vulnerable Californians. We did not reverse the really draconian maximum family grant in CalWORKs. So there were a number of critical investments that had gone through the budget process, were agreed upon in conference committee, and met an early fate. And I was just deeply, deeply disappointed.
And we could tell, your countenance, your, I guess the deflation in your eyes, you really felt it. I know that you really did.
Well, as I stood the floor and I said, you know, we will continue to make history as the state with the highest child poverty rate. And personally, as a California native, as a mother, as a policymaker, I'm offended. I'm deeply offended by the fact that we weren't willing to invest at a time when we have the money and we can.
And I know that as the last few years have progressed and you sort of had to bite the bullet and vote like everybody else for some of those draconian cuts, and you kept being told next year, Senator Mitchell, next year. Do you feel like you're sort of a victim of a broken promise a little bit?
It's not about me being a victim. It's about those 2 million California children who are living in poverty. That's who will continue to be victimized by the broken promise of the California dream. The fact that we're not expanding more slots to early care and education. The fact that we're not increasing reimbursements to the child care delivery system. Those are the Californians who the promise was broken.
What are you telling your constituents? What are you telling your communities after you hearing next year? Likely you probably told them that. What are you telling your communities coming back after this budget?
Well, you know, we are in the extraordinary session and we've got to make some really critical decisions about new California resources that can help support increasing Medi-Cal reimbursement rates, which is critical to make sure that all Californians who are entitled to Medi-Cal have access to a provider in the system. Those who rely on in-home support services, taking care of our frail and elderly and the disabled in their homes, making sure that there's an appropriate rate increase to support the cuts they experienced years ago. And thirdly, the Department of Developmental Disabilities. The budget did include the closure plan for 2 of the large developmental centers. What we did not fund was the support side in the community, the services that those people will rely on once they are moved out of those developmental centers. So this extraordinary session, we've got to do the work to find the resources to pay for those critical services. So it's not over for those areas. I have the pleasure, if I am reelected, if the constituents in the 30th SD see fit to reelect me in 4 years, I got 8 years, and I'm going to come back advocating on behalf of California's neediest population year after year after year, because that's why I ran, and that's the community whom I feel an obligation to.
And I know that your fellow lawmakers empathized with you and empathized with the frustration having come back with that more distinctive and defined spending and then coming back with an agreement that was not so much. And the argument seemed to be, we don't have the money. We don't have the money. Where's it going to come from to pay for this? But do you agree with that? Do you empathize with that?
No, I don't. The Department of Finance goes through their process of developing projections. It's all based on projections. You know, you and I, there is no distinct formula to determine how much money the state will earn over the next several months. Finance has projections. The Ledge Analyst Office has projections. The legislature looked, and over the last several years, reality has been closer to the projections provided by LAO. And so the legislature's budget that we put forward, the conference committee agreement, included spending beyond the governor's comfort level. We looked at investments beyond the Department of Finance projections. And so we do have the money. LAO has suggested that we do. They don't have a magic wand. They don't look into a crystal ball. There is a methodology that they go through just like finance. They have been closer to accurate than not. Our projections, the state came in millions of dollars over what they projected a year ago. So this wasn't, you know, it's not a science, it is an art, but the legislature based what we felt was a safe projection level based on, you know, sound projections in the past. And so to simply say we don't have the money, I don't agree with that. It's about priorities. We have to live within the confines and the reality of Prop 30 going away and the rainy day fund, Prop 98. Even with those restrictions, there were additional resources that would have allowed us to do a lot of good for a lot of people in the state.
Well, as a legislator who has been here in the tough and lean times for California's economy, does it feel better now to be arguing, if you will, about how much to spend versus how much to cut?
No question, no question. But again, it's even more offensive when we have the resources on the table and we chose not to invest.
You're always looking for a way to balance the scales, promote equity in the state financially and other ways, and I know you are trying to do that with a constitutional amendment, trying to change the property tax code, SCA 5. You and Senator Hancock have authored this bill that would bring fairness to the property tax code. Tell us about that.
We are trying to close the commercial property tax loophole that was created in Prop 13. I was not yet of voting age when Prop 13 passed.
I was just barely. I was a senior in high school.
Got
yes,
you.
Yeah.
But I have a distinct memory
Yes.
of the public debate.
Yes.
And I think I have a memory because I also remember Prop 13 being blamed for a number of the community-based services that went away after its passage, the reduction in our public library hours, the reduction in the after-school programs. And so I remember clearly that the whole notion was to save grandma's house, to make sure that the seniors who had been in their homes, who were retired, who were going to live on their retirement income, would not be priced out of their homes based on their property taxes increasing to a level that they couldn't afford. I don't know that voters, when they Prop 13, really thought they were protecting large commercial landowners the same way we were trying to protect grandma. And when we look at the rate now of who pays the lion's share of the property taxes, it's shifted. And individual homeowners are now paying a larger percentage than commercial property owners. Commercial property owners whose property is currently valued and their taxes are based on that are fine. It's those folks who are taking advantage of the protections of the Prop 13, this loophole, that we're trying to just make them pay their fair share. This will not reverse Prop 13. It will not impact private property owners. It won't even impact, for example, in my district, apartment building owners. It's commercial property property owners and their taxes, and creating a sense of equity and fairness in the system.
Now, you, of course, are tinkering with the third rail of politics here in California, is Prop 13.
I don't know that we really are. I think when we distinguish in our conversations with voters, and they understand that it's not personal property, and we explain the commercial property tax loophole, people understand. So I don't think it's the traditional third rail that we all think about.
Now, this is an SCA. It's going to take a two-thirds majority vote.
It is.
What's your possibilities here? Where is it right now as we
It's
speak?
so early in the process. Senator Hancock and I have had several op-eds written. We've had we did a press conference in the Capitol. It will be heard in its first committee probably when we come back from Christmas summer break. which is late August. And so we'll see. I think the important thing is it's in print. It's allowing us all, it's allowing the language to be vetted, and it's allowing us to have a conversation about bringing a sense of fairness to the system.
That we probably couldn't have had 40 years ago when people were so set for it.
Exactly.
And your teachers probably told you in your classrooms, as they did mine, this is going to spell the end to our schools, budget cuts, and your family was going, don't worry, everything's going to fine. It's going to help us out.
We're saving grandma's home.
Yeah, right.
And so really making sure that people understand all of the components of Prop 13 and now our 40-year in retrospect review and what we now need to do to make the system much more fair. When I recognize that my home county of Los Angeles alone could see an increase in local funding of $2.9 billion, and the dollars would be directed to the counties to support those safety net programs, education, the libraries, the schools, other safety net programs, other social support programs. That's a lot of new money that counties could certainly use in this day and age.
Let's talk about some things going on in the rest of the country and how they affect California. The spate of officer-involved shootings in cities like Baltimore and in particular Ferguson, Missouri, and the follow-up investigations have all brought a focus on the accountability of law enforcement and the grand juries that investigate them. That has prompted you to consider some changes in the grand jury system here in California and the use of grand juries when it comes to those officer-involved shootings.
Yes.
Tell us about SB 227.
Well, I think if nothing else, the last 6 months, we could certainly agree that race clearly matters. We experienced that most recently in terms of the heinous shootings at the church in South Carolina, and we've seen it over time with these police-involved interactions with African American men and women, many of which have been captured on tape, to bring us up close and personal to the fact that Black lives matter and that Black lives are being compromised at the hands of law enforcement in many communities across this nation. I think the examples you cited aren't unique to those municipalities. It could happen in California, as it did almost 20 years ago in the Rodney King incident. And so it was important for us to really step back and objectively take a look at the process and really understand what we could do in state law to create a sense of fairness and equity. The grand jury system is up for public debate currently. There are a number of members of the bench and bar who are really beginning to write white papers and opine on its continued relevance. And one area, I heard a NPR story, a retired judge, Ladoris, her last name will come to me in a minute.
I know who you're talking about. I read that. Yes, where she says
testified
we
in
need
committee.
to eliminate the use of the grand jury.
She's looking at complete grand jury reform. And so we've taken a very narrow slice and suggested that when a law enforcement officer is involved in shooting or excessive crime that leads to death, that it shouldn't go through the very cloaked in secrecy grand jury system, but should go through the public hearing process, just like if you or I were to brandish a weapon or kill someone. And so we're not creating a separate track for law enforcement, but asking that the DAs put them through the same public process anyone else would go through. When I talk to constituents about grand juries, we know very little. They don't adhere to the same adversarial process as the open court. They're not transparent. You don't know who the impaneled grand jurors are. There's no defense attorney. There's no judge present. There's no cross-examination. So all of the aspects of the public jury system that we know protects the guilty and the innocent, or creates a culture in which you are innocent until proven guilty, and we all can see it and understand the process, doesn't exist with grand jury systems. We can't even tell you how many panels have been impaneled in California. The outcome statistics aren't even collected on grand juries in California. So we just thought it was appropriate, as in many counties across the state. Los Angeles County and another Northern California county, the district attorneys have decided not to use grand juries in police-involved shootings that lead to death. We want to make it the state standard across the board to create a fair and transparent process for everyone.
But California's grand jury system is so much better than other states and the federal defense attorney. I mean, they're required to what is it called, the habeas corpus. If they don't do it, the cases can get dropped. It's so much better that maybe you're trying to change something that doesn't need changing in California. What do you say to that?
Well, again, we're not trying to reform the entire grand jury system.
Right.
And again, it's based on a hundreds-year-old system based in Great Britain, and Great Britain doesn't use it anymore. I think it's fair for us to take a look at a system that's cloaked in secrecy. We talk about transparency in government. The issue around protecting the privacy of the accused in the grand jury system, if you or I are called before a grand jury, is very different from law enforcement, because the law enforcement entities release the names as soon as the video comes out. And so all of the aspects that they argue in favor of a grand jury system for private citizens don't apply in these police-involved interactions. They just don't.
Let's talk, before we close up here, just some reflections on what has happened in the last few weeks in Charleston, South Carolina, with this tragedy, this crime that's gone on that has really ripped the scab off of this country, and this getting rid of this comfortable fiction that we are beyond racism in the United States of America. Is there any grace? Is there any tender mercy that can be taken from this situation of these people being killed in their sanctuary, figuratively and literally? And what can California do as a result?
Without question, and it's interesting that you use the term grace, because I don't know if you heard the president deliver the eulogy for my former colleague and friend, Senator Pinckney from South Carolina. And he talked about the word grace, and he talked about the grace South Carolina has showed, the family members of the deceased, in dealing with this very personal yet very public, deep-seated, centuries-old issue. The whole public debate around the Confederate battle flag and our clarification in history about the flag that's flown in front of that state capitol is the battle flag of the Confederacy, not the Confederate flag. And so our understanding of history is being checked. And the fact that the South Carolina legislature is once again having the debate, the fact that it has risen to the level of debate in the presidential race for next year means that those lives were not lost in vain. And it means that we have to continue to have the conversation about cultural understanding and competence, about gun violence, and about the appropriateness of flying the Confederate battle flag above state houses, in some instances above the flags of their states, given symbolically what it means to a great number of Americans, a great number of Californians. It is a symbol of racism, bigotry, and hate. And so, again, I think the fact that we're continuing to have this conversation,
even here in California,
on the Senate floor, means their legacy will live on.
Great. We are out of time. Thank you for your amazing grace here on behalf of the people of California. Glad to have you. Let's come back and talk some more. Plenty to talk about with Senator Holly Mitchell from the 30th Senate District in California, in Los Angeles. And that is it for this edition of Senate Spotlight. Please join us next time around as we discuss important legislative issues and policies with the newsmakers and newsbreakers of the California State Senate. From the state capitol here in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching Senate Spotlight.